Hello and welcome to Lesson 7, Cultural Variations in Attachment. In this session we're going to look at how culture might actually influence the type of attachment that we develop with our primary caregiver. So let's begin. If we go back to Ainsworth then, her sensitivity hypothesis argues that the mother's interaction with the infant is what produces the different attachment styles. So if the mother is secure and engages and is sensitive and responsive to the infant's needs, then the infant will develop a secure attachment themselves. However, if the mother is avoidant and they are distant, emotionally cold, then the infant may develop a type A avoidant attachment. Equally, if the mother is inconsistent, sometimes wanting closeness and other times wanting distance, this may produce a type C attachment style in the offspring. So if these early interactions are really important for developing attachment style, then it is reasonable to assume that given so much of our early interaction is based as parents on our own upbringing, whether culturally or individually, that attachment styles may develop predominantly depending on different cultures. So in other words, cultures may influence the type of attachments that we develop. If we remember then, Ainsworth's original study took place in the US and involved US infants. So that it's possible that North American infants are just different to the rest of the cultures, so we may not be able to apply them. Equally telling was a rather ethnocentric way in which Ainsworth categorised the typical, which just happened to be the majority type B in her culture, as secure. Now secure has positive connotations and insecure has negative connotations. So we could argue that there is a degree of ethnocentrism already occurring here. And this is what spawned a variety of different cross-cultural studies involving the strange situation. Now, it needs to be pointed out that Ainsworth herself did actually carry out research in different cultural settings, and many of her ideas were actually developed while she was working in Britain. So it's not fair to say that she was culturally isolated, but there may still be some cultural bias occurring in her research. So this is Van IJZENDOORN and KROONENBERG, the key study for this topic. They carried out meta-analysis. Now, a meta-analysis is essentially a study of studies. You do not go out and get any new participants, you don't carry out any new research. What you do is you collect all the research that everyone else has actually already produced and you develop it into you carry out an analysis on it. You compare, in this case, the different attachment types of different cultures, the percentages, and that gives you some way of investigating, in this case, cross-cultural differences. So they carried out a meta-analysis, 32 studies, 2,000 babies in total, who were each assessed using the strange situation and classified as either type A, type B, or type C. What did they find? Now, before we dive into these findings, which are very interesting, it is worth noting a few things about data interpretation. You'll have to do this in the exam. What are you actually looking for when you're given a table like this? Well, I would say a few rules. We're looking for things that stand out. So the first thing to consider is, what are the categories? So we have 3 categories here of secure, avoidant, and resistant, or ambivalent. So we're looking for the highest, the lowest, the things that stand out the most in these categories. The highest, the lowest, and the things that stand out. Another thing that's quite interesting is the number of studies that's included in this table. That's going to be relevant. Look at the bottom. We're calculating means for each of these categories. And that's relevant because if one group of people are disproportionately represented, as they are in this case, that can influence the mean. So if we know, for example, secure attachment is very common in the United States, that is going to increase the weighting that the United States studies have, potentially, on the outcome of this. So we need to be careful when we're comparing number of studies, and it's highly possible, for example, that in case of where there are single studies, perhaps that was an aberration, perhaps those statistics come out by chance. Right, let's get stuck in then. 18 studies in the US, so that's going to influence the results overall. What's the highest secure? Well, the highest secure is Great Britain, with Sweden closely following, showing that nearly 3/4 of all children assessed using the strange situation had a secure relationship with their caregiver. The lowest for secure was China, and the other two were obviously avoidant and resistant. Avoidant, the highest, was in West Germany. Now, why West Germany? History buffs, you will know that this study was carried out prior to the reunification of Germany. So actually there were two separate countries. East Germany was under Soviet control, so there was no way of getting research findings from that area of the country. The lowest here was Japan. So Japan had just 5% avoidant. And then resistant. Highest resistance was Israel, and the lowest was Great Britain. We're just very, very secure and maybe slightly avoidant types in Britain. So what does this show? This seems to show huge cultural differences. Just look at China. There's a 25% difference between Great Britain in terms of secure attachment and China. How are they raising their kids that differs so dramatically from how we raise our children? Well, let's look at some corresponding research. So in addition, there are a number of other studies. Grossman and Grossman carried out, for example, a study in Germany. They found that insecure avoidant was very typical, highly typical in their German sample. They put this down to cultural differences in parental or child rearing. And what they mean by that is, in Germany, and those of you who've ever been on a German exchange will know this, they allow their children to sort of explore. You know, kids will be out all day. They may not even have a mobile phone. Mum won't necessarily be checking in with them every 5 minutes. So they emphasise independence. Now that's very different perhaps from in Britain and the United States, where we are very cautious when it comes to, you know, independence. You know, often your parents will phone you throughout the day just to see if you're okay, and if you're going out somewhere, they'll expect you to phone them or text them when you get there to tell them you're safe. So Grossman and Grossman seem to confirm, if you remember what we found here, that this high avoidance would be produced from slightly emotionally reserved parents who are encouraging independence, or more importantly, discouraging dependence. Okay, Takahashi carried out a strange situation using 60 middle-class Japanese infants. They found that type C was quite common. 32% were insecure resistant. So extreme were these infants' reaction to the being left alone part of the strange situation that in 80% of cases they had to stop the experiment. But had they continued, the researchers claim that most of the children would have developed or would have been classified as securely attached. So it was just on this one being left alone element of the strange situation. Now that's interesting. What do we know about the Japanese? Well, they promote interdependence rather than independence. So the idea is, think about these old societies, especially in Asia, where it's the expectation of the children that when they grow older, they will care for the parents and the grandparents. Very family-centred. That promotes interdependence, and the idea is if your children are dependent on you, then they will develop that as the norm, and then when you are dependent on them, that will be accepted and just, you know, allowed. So with this encouragement of interdependence, we produce children who are, when left alone, highly distressed. They're not used to being left alone. They're used to being around family or involved, or having parents who are involved. This is a stereotype of Asian parents generally, but it's one borne out in a number of studies, and I'll share one with you in class. Asian parents tend to be very involved in their children's lives in terms of education, friendship groups, and romantic development of romantic relationships. So it's worth, you know, noting that these different sort of parenting styles may influence how the children develop. So let's explain the differences in a bit more detail. So there are all sorts of parenting influences that we have on us. Modern culture, think about our own parental experiences or our own experience of parents. You know, free will and cognition. There are different parenting styles that come in and out of fashion, especially in the West. You know, the spare the rod and spoil the child moves on to, empathize and treat every child as a unique, little butterfly and all that sort of stuff. We have these movements within society which change the way parents actually raise their kids. Think about the behaviourist approach, which was very much, shake your kid's hand before they go to bed and a quick peck on the cheek if you must, rather than the Bowlbian sort of, emotional contact is as important as food. Anyway, parenting styles. Let's have a look. So in France, the French approach is a very hands-off parenting style. However, mothers in France tend to be quite matriarchal from research, and they demand respect. So whilst they allow their children a very sort of laissez-faire upbringing, the parents themselves, especially mothers, demand respect from their children. In the UK, it's found that we tend to rationalise or attempt to rationalise with our children, explaining through logic and reason, victim-centred discipline, that sort of stuff. And the idea is we're really trying to, and this probably actually relates well to our history. We have some of the finest philosophers in history who were British. So we have this sense that reason can overcome all. Let's get through to the child's rational core. In South Africa, they promote sort of heritage and tradition as a motif for parenting. In China and South Korea, as we sort of mentioned already, parents are very involved. There's this emphasis of respect for elders, all elders, and it's a very formal parenting style rather than perhaps a less formal buddy Western style where mum's not only your mum, she's also your best friend. And then corporal punishment. So an emphasis on the physical disciplining of children in Nigeria, where even in schools it's still seen, physical punishment is still seen as a positive educational tool. So that gives you some rounding of how different parenting styles might, you could conceivably see, influence how children are raised and the type of attachment they develop. Further evaluation of culture effect then. So IJZENDOORN and KROONENBERG studied, there are lots of limitations to it and we'll break those down in class, but a couple here. One finding that they had, which was quite substantial, was that there were 1.5 times the differences within culture than there were between cultures. So, you go to the north of Britain, you go somewhere like Lincoln or York. Do they raise the children the same as they do down in the south? Well, yeah, broadly speaking, but there are still huge cultural differences. And that's what IJZENDOORN and KROONENBERG found, that in the rural areas as well, you may have found a very different style of parenting than those found in the cities, and equally you would have found the attachment type that corresponds to it. The other limitation is that although this study used strange situation, they didn't actually carry out those strange situation studies. And what you find when you look in different textbooks and different pieces of research is the method and the order in which each of the stages of the strange situation take place actually vary greatly depending on who's doing it. Some emphasize, the parent leaves the room and then the stranger enters. Some say the parent enters and the stranger enters and then the parent leaves. And they do vary slightly, and that could result in a different outcome in terms of the results. Support from research such as Takahashi and GROSSMAN seem to suggest that there are cultural differences, however, with the above caveat there. That's cultural differences in attachment. As always, if you have any questions, please do let me know. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time, and I will see you around. Goodbye.